Now I'm going to begin with a larger square-headed brush. I'm going to dip that in water so that it's a little bit damp. This is going to extend the wet life of my paint and allow me to drag it farther. And I'm going to begin in a fairly large area, which is why I'm going to be using a large brush. Here I'm grabbing a good amount of my primary yellow and about double that amount of titanium white here. So I'm going to mix those two up here on my palette, and then I'm going to apply it to my sky. Doing this with a horizontal stroke, moving my way across the sky and also downwards. Now again, I'm able to get such wide coverage and kind of spread the paint out so much without it getting thin because my brush is fairly damp, and it's going to allow the paint to move much more smoothly. There we go. I'm also using very soft applications here with my brush. That way I don't apply too much pressure and I don't create a streaky aesthetic. Now, I do want that gradient from the bottom to be the brightest and the top to be more saturated and more yellow. So I'm going to grab some of that primary yellow, mix that down in here, and I can bring that back up to the top, kind of revitalize the saturation. If you ever find that you're losing too much saturation, it's probably because you're mixing in a lot of a titanium white or a Mars black. And if you want to just put that back in, just do a subtle glaze or a secondary layer with that primary color. Now I'm going to begin working on the cliffs here in the background because they're the next thing closest to us. We started with the farthest subject, which is the sky. Now we're moving up a little bit. So I'm going to take some primary yellow, I'm going to take a little bit of primary red and mix those together to make an orange, just like that. Now I'm going to grab just a hint of primary blue and mix that in there as well. As you can see, we're starting to get a bit of a green. That's because the primary yellow and primary blue are mixing together. And I didn't have a lot of primary red, so I'm going to take some additional primary red and throw that in there now. Starting to balance it out a little bit more, let's grab a little bit more primary red. Now we grab so much to the point where it's all primary red. So I'm going to grab some more of that primary blue. There we go, it's a little bit darker, it's a little bit more green now though. So let's get it back to that nice warm shade. What we're trying to mix right now is actually a brown. And you can mix a brown using a combination of your primary colors. So I'm going to take this color now. Just going to start working that along the edges of my cliff. There we go. It's a really nice color. If you ever want to mix browns, it's as simple as mixing your primary colors together. And you can get so many different kinds. If you want to make it a little bit easier, you can just use a burnt umber. That does work quite well. Here you can see that it's mixing a little bit with the titanium white of the sky, which is making it a little bit brighter, a little bit more diffused, which is not a bad thing. So we need to build depth around this. Depth is built around subjects by wrapping light around varying areas. And that means you have a light side, a middle tone, and then a dark tone. And the light wraps around and creates that. And once you see that, you see something three-dimensional. So what we're going to do is we're going to start adding some light to this. I'm going to switch yet again to a smaller brush, smaller square-headed brush. Again, it has that nice sharp edge, which would be great for this. But it'll still carry a good amount of paint. So here I have that brown, and I want a highlighted version of the brown. This is the mid-tone, so I need a bright highlighted tone. So I'm going to take some additional titanium white, throw that in here, take a little bit of our primary yellow, just see what we can get. I'm blending it in. The more I blend this way, the more it turns into a brown. And now I have a bunch of options. I have more of a very brown, I have more of a pure mixture between that yellow and that, and then I have more of a yellow heavy mixture. I'm going to grab right in between the yellow heavy and the other mix, and I'm going to use that for essentially the tops of my mountains. And this is going to make it look like the light is coming from behind. It's illuminating the top, creating some depth. So now I'm going to work to the bottom and move upwards. Just like this. I'm still trying to allow that mid-tone to be the divider between our highlights and our darker tones. And this is just in the areas where the light we feel will not be hitting. Now I'm going to switch over to my smaller round-headed brush, as you can see here. Make sure that it's nice and damp. Grab some titanium white. Start working on my waterfalls. Doing this with a little bit of a tapping effect so that it looks like occasionally it's hitting a rock or two. Maybe it's winding down an area or two. We're just going to get to the bottom. There we go. Then I'm going to take some of that titanium white, a good amount of water, create a little bit of a mist down here. Moving my brush in circular motions and just blending it out. The goal is to have it be the whitest at the bottom and then move upwards and then transition to more clear at the top. So I'll go back and I'll add a little bit more white to the bottom there. And this will just look like the water's crashing. It's creating a bit of a mist. Now I'm going to switch over to my smaller square-headed brush. Going to make sure that it's nice and clean, nice and damp. Going to grab some primary yellow, some titanium white, mix those two up, and create our water here, which is a reflection of the sky. So it's not going to be a blue. Instead, we're going to get this nice, warm, bright yellow. I'm going to begin working on the road in the background, and the road in the background is going to be more bright. It's going to have more color, more like the top of the mountain. Then as we get towards this foreground area, it's going to get a lot darker. So I'm going to begin here on my pathway with this brown, covering pieces of the foreground using the large square-headed brush because it's going to cover everything. There we go. Now I'm going to make more of a yellow dominant mixture of this brown and create some highlights for this road. So I'm going to blend it half with that pigment that I just had. I'm going to apply that to the back. And the back again is going to be the brightest area because it's closest to the light. We're not going to get the pigment that we have on our palette here, but instead a mixture of that pigment and the pigment that we already have on the canvas. Using the square-headed brush, doing a bit of a dabbing motion here, just so I get the implication of little dirt mounds. It's going to make it look more three-dimensional. Now I want a darker pigment for the foreground because it's a little bit farther away. So I'm going to grab a bit of that Mars black, mix that over here on the other side of my brown, make that darker pigment, and apply that in the foreground. Best applied again through a little bit of a tapping motion. That way we still get that impression. Now we have this road where it's much brighter, the back much darker. At the front it has that nice highlight lining all of it. And now I can begin adding some little pools of water. I'm going to do so with the smaller square-headed brush. Make sure that it is nice and damp. And this scene, I want it to look like it had just rained. So there are going to be little pools of water in this dirt road. So I'm going to grab some of that titanium white, some of that primary yellow. And I've lost my drawing for the most part, but I have a good idea of where it is because I've been watching this painting for quite some time. Here I'm just taking my mixture of titanium white and primary yellow, creating these little pools of water. Now I'm going to be using the older square-headed brush. Again, you can make one of these by taking a regular flat-headed brush, peeling back the bristles, and making something a little bit more disheveled. But this is going to allow us to tap on just a litany of different implications very quickly. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some primary yellow, move it down here on my palette. I'm going to get some Mars black, mix those two together, a little bit more, and a tiny bit of red to warm it. And now I have a very dark base color. And I'm going to apply this to this line of trees. I'm going to start with my darkest color, then I'm going to build on the mid-tone, and I'm going to build on the highlight. Now I'm going to take more of that primary yellow, mix it fairly close to that last green, but make sure I get something slightly brighter. See that? Going to begin applying that to the edges of the tree that are receiving more light. So everything that's kind of closer to this area. You can additionally take a little bit of titanium white. It'll desaturate the pigment more, but it'll thicken it and it'll make sure that it actually shows up, which is important. And then as I run out of pigment, I move more to the back of the tree and create this gradient, see? Now I'm going to take that same old square-headed brush, grab some additional Mars black, just like we did before, some additional titanium, or rather primary yellow, just like we did before, create a nice dark base layer. And I'm going to start working on the bushes down below. So you're allowed to make this cover the highlights of the trees, and you want it to extend out into the dirt. The fine sharp edge of this square-headed brush is helping me create this branch very efficiently. There we are. Going to dip this back in the water, make sure that I can get those nice fine sharp strokes. Now I'm going to go back to my palette, mix up a bit of a brighter brown yet again. So I'm starting with that yellow, the red, tiny bit of the blue, a little bit of Mars black, desaturate it, a little bit of titanium white, brighten it up. We have a bit of a pink, so instead I'm going to throw a little bit more yellow in there. Give it a nice warm golden tone to it as well. Now we have a very bright peachy brown. This would make for a great skin tone, by the way. If you ever want to make skin tones, combination of these three primary colors, a little bit of black, good amount of titanium white, you'll get something similar to that. But I'm going to use this for the highlights of the bark that are protruding from this tree, that are closest to the light. So I'm going to be using this tapping effect, as you can see. Now we're going to jump into the foliage with the older square-headed brush, and I'm going to begin by mixing what's going to look like, yet again, more of a brown. Trying to create a pinkish orange with hints of brown in it. I think that it'll look really nice next to all of the colors we've created. So I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to start out here. This nice little tapping effect. Covering my branches if need be. and just doing a little sample size, seeing how I like it. Just continuously going back, making this pigment slightly darker every time, applying it to this top left-hand corner, and then moving it into the rest of the piece. Trying to make it look like different areas are slightly darker, and that we have varying amounts of foliage and depth in here. Now I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush, the pigment that I just used, plush, some additional titanium white, and our primary red. I'm going to take this new pigment, I'm just going to tap in some little flowers down here. We want them to be fairly small in distance. Don't want to apply a lot of pressure with our brush. I'm just using the tip of my brush to create these. As we get closer to us, they can be much larger. Remember, just little dots in the background. When you want to do the petals, I like to do 3 taps, 1 for the middle petal and then 2 for the sides. Just seems to make it come along quite nicely. And I'll create some little petals for this tree as well. Still just using the corner of my brush. Now I'm going to go back here, grab some primary blue, some titanium white, mix those together, and create some nice blue flowers as well, just to create another little splash of color in this painting. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.